Cans it up, the Penguins were changing. If they're able to come out relatively easy, it's Keith Primo with the first. Primo cuts the inside, scores! There it is! Keith Primo! The much maligned center of the Philadelphia Flyers wins this game in the fifth overtime.
Everybody, it's Isaiah, just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey. Yes, it is Isaiah, and we are back. Welcome back to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 136. And the Flyers are 6-2-2 after 10 games. And we want to take a look back, but we also want to take a look forward, as I think most of us are going to agree on this panel that what we see between now and December 1st is probably going to determine the destiny of this team going forward. Let me introduce the panel. And before we get to our esteemed guest, we got a chef to the left. B, how are you, man?
Very good. Thank you very much.
And, as always, the great Dan Silver.
I'm doing great, man. Excited for another show.
Yep. Flyers got a busy schedule coming up ahead. And with us tonight from Sunrise Philly Mag and, of course, the Off the Post podcast is Anthony Mingioni. How are you doing?
Doing well, Isaiah. Dan, good to see everybody.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. You know, we've had you a couple of times before. Always get good feedback, and why not? I mean, it's you guys do a great job at OTP, and you got another podcast right now with Formula One racing.
Yeah, Jason Martinez and I both have we're both doing a Formula One podcast after every race called Stick to F1. So we've been doing that since we started doing it over the summer. We both kind of found out last year we had mutual interest in motorsports, specifically Formula One, and we would always be chatting, texting back and forth with each other. And then finally we just said, hey, we keep doing this texting back and forth. We could probably turn this thing into a podcast. So that's basically what we've been doing since the summer. It's been our little sort of pet project that we've been working on, and we've enjoyed it. We just finished recording a recap and observations of the Mexican Grand Prix that happened on Sunday. So good stuff there, and it's another thing you guys can check out from us.
Yeah, absolutely. Check that out. So we're talking about the Flyers now, the record is good. If you look at kind of the underlying numbers and things like that, they're certainly ahead of what they were last year. But in your recent article at Sunrise Philly magazine, which I would recommend to everybody take a look at, you talked about their process, where they've been, where they're headed, considering the injuries they've had. What's your feeling there?
My feeling on them right now is that, again, they still have a lot of different. They still have new parts that they're still sort of getting to work together. Some parts I think are working a bit more successfully than necessary than others. And it was, again, going into that Western Canadian road trip, I thought they were on a moderately decent situation there. And then I think there was obviously a lot of excitement that when they defeated the Edmonton Oilers and how they won that game. And then they followed up, obviously, with the Vancouver game as well. But there is some things about, that I'm seeing. I think if we kind of break things down sort of period by period, we know that Philadelphia seems to be doing it very well. And they've obviously made it a point to make sure that they're starting games on time this year, that when they drop the puck, that they're engaged at the beginning of the game. We have, however, seen up until the Washington game on Saturday a bit of a let-off pressure-wise. I would say probably, they were outshot. They're being outshot by a substantial margin in the second period, and they've, I think, been fortunate enough to get really good, for the most part, really good goaltending play to mitigate the scoring damage that could potentially occur. And then they usually have done a pretty good job of recovering in the third period. And I think that's kind of helped them with regards to putting their record where they're at. So again, the concerns that I had from this past week is the Arizona game I thought was underwhelming. Arizona, not a particularly good team, but I thought they really kind of took it to the Flyers a bit in that game. And then add to the mix, they played against a very shorthanded Pittsburgh Penguins team, which still had talent in their lineup, certainly. And it's not as if they were playing the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins here in that circumstance. But there was enough manpower, I thought, the Philadelphia had that, if you go into that game, they should be able to win it. But they were just, the compete level in that game was not good. They were getting beaten pretty consistently. Especially if there's a 50-50 opportunity. Pittsburgh was just out hustling them throughout that game. And that I kind of took it as a bit of a concern. And then I think they did the same. And I thought their efforts against Washington, I thought they played, they're a classic road game in this circumstance in terms of, keeping things simple. And that's something that, Travis Konechny had spoken to after the Penguins game, is that, they kind of got sucked into the chaos in that Penguins game, and that they needed to kind of simplify, keep things structured, and that they were going to get better results. And that's exactly what I think occurred for the better part of their most recent game against Washington. So, it kind of stems a little bit of the concern that I have, but again, when I kind of got into sort of, diving in a little bit to some of the numbers, especially when I was looking at natural stat trick, their 5-on-5 play has, at time, again, I think part of it is because, again, they've been getting caved in the second period. That this is something that needs to improve with the level of opponents that they're going to be playing this month.
Yeah, absolutely. Chef?
So, the play of Provorov has been pretty good, really good this season. And, we've been very critical, some of us in the past, whether or not his hockey IQ is really up there. Now, he's playing with Justin Braun, who is playing his ass off, obviously. He's been very good, too. Were we wrong about Provorov's hockey IQ, or is it something or is he just overplaying and overachieving right now? And we were kind of right. It's like not as good as we thought it was. There was a lot of disputes about him being like on his own if he was a top line defenseman. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think, again, he feeds well off of, I think he needs a fellow defenseman with him. And this is, again, the reason why they went out and traded for Ryan Ellis, was that, you need that sort of, and some of this is not always necessarily an instinctual thing. It's sometimes just the ability to read. I think Ivan actually his hockey IQ is pretty good. You need to have someone who's going to be playing with him that he can kind of feed off of. And initially when they had Ryan Ellis, it looked early returns on that looked very good, and now Ellis has been out. Braun has played extremely well, much better than I ever thought he would have, in that first pairing role. But Braun has experience in playing higher up in defense previously. Now, again, you want to get Ellis back as soon as possible, but I'm not taking anything away from what I'm seeing out of Ivan this season. I think he's played particularly well. It's been strong. His play, what I've liked is his neutral and defensive zone play has been really a very composed level of play. He's being smart, maybe not overthinking it, trying to much in many ways. It's probably, goes straight to the Flyers, overall defensive performance at times. And that, the key thing is to keep it simple and to don't make, don't make a crazy low percentage play. Try to, work zone by zone, move up through the zone, and work things that way. And he's such a strong player physically, Ivan, and he can handle a major load in this case. But you definitely want to get Ryan Ellis, I think, back here soon, so that you don't necessarily burn him out, Provorov over the course of the season. Because one of the biggest issues here as well is that I think that for Philly's defense is that we saw Alain Vigneault really lean heavily on his top two pairings in the last game, and understandably so. When Washington shortens their bench, that's to be expected when Washington's trailing. But I would also say as well that I would prefer to have Ellis back, and then you can really sort of solidify that third pairing with Yandel and Braun being in that spot. Because then you can kind of really dictate things, I think, a bit more to your opponent in those circumstances when you're able to roll out three pairs like that, especially as we go through the long season here, that you want to make sure to divvy out that ice time a bit more than obviously Alain was able to do, certainly in the last game.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, to that also, the second pairing, you had mentioned them being heavily leaned upon in the third pairing, kind of withered away a little bit at the end of the game, understandably so. Ristolainen and Sanheim had a pretty good game. They had a really good game, in fact. And they seem to be gelling. Now, I know a lot of players, a lot of fans, and a lot of podcaster guys like ourselves, not saying us in general, but a lot of them are really hard on Travis Sanheim still and are willing to give, I guess, Ristolainen a little bit more time. Are we finally seeing the combination of these two guys gelling together?
I mean, this is 10 games now. So that's with a brand new pairing and, Ristolainen missing time, obviously, during the preseason. We have to account for that as well, that he had to get himself, he's another, again, poster child for in this circumstance. And I sometimes draw some comparisons between him and Ivan in that they're both sort of, were highly used in their situations, both in Buffalo and obviously here in Philadelphia. And that you have to, I think, to have a good partner with you as well. Travis, let's face it, Travis had a rough start to the season. Nobody is going to deny that. There was a lot of times where I thought Travis was really struggling, but I thought he did a really good job against Washington. And I think they've had their moments of struggle, no question. But I think as they go along, these two, I am fascinated by, the physical attributes of this pairing, what they could potentially do. Both of them, I think, are pretty good when they're, obviously Travis more of an offensive defenseman in this circumstance. He's the guy you're going to want probably up on the play more than Risto, who you probably want to be a bit more, defensively consistent in that pairing. But Risto's also got skills as well, where he is a pretty good outlet. He's got a very strong outlet pass. The key thing that I need from Risto, that I would see from Risto, is that he needs to do a good job on his reads, to finish his plays, not release off his forward too soon and let a guy get behind him. And again, these are things that he's still learning the system, as Alain Vigneault alluded to.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan?
Yeah, so, for me, and we talked about this on the show last week, the season still has the potential to go off the rails based on what happens with Ryan Ellis. I'm just curious, with him and Kevin Hayes, it's still kind of unclear when those guys are going to be returning. What's your latest sense on, what's going on with Ellis, when we might see him and Hayes back, and what you're expecting to see from Hayes when he gets back, and how long you'll think, takes him to get into a groove. So basically your thoughts on those two guys right now.
Sure. So let's start off first with Hayes. I think Hayes is getting pretty close. Elaine indicated that we're looking at, an outside chance of him playing the Toronto game. So if I take it that at word, I'm thinking potentially, again, they're going to practice tomorrow. And we'll see where things are at in terms of where they decide if Hayes is out with the regular group and where he's going to be placed with. My feeling is Hayes, because you didn't have a training camp, I think it's almost certain in my mind, although, Elaine could surprise everybody. I think you would probably see him playing on the fourth line, at least to start, just to get his legs underneath him. I could see him potentially with Thompson, again, in certain circumstances where Thompson may be able to take draws. Again, you've got to get his legs under him. I think you want to see, where he's at. And he's been working. I know he and Ellis worked particularly. I was not at practice, but I know the skills thing that they did with Angelo Ricci was pretty extensive, pretty strenuous. So they're trying to push to get themselves back into the lineup. Ellis, we're going to need to see. Again, I think a lot of people got very excited, saw the Nick Seeler move and thought, oh, is it possible? And word I got on that was that it was based off of salary cap, and I believed he's still on on an emergency still listed as emergency recall, but I'll have to double check on that. So I know there was cap considerations there, so I wouldn't be too surprised if Seeler again is back up and potentially playing the game on Wednesday. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think I'm kind of eyeing up the Carolina based on if I'm parsing through what Elaine's saying here. I'm looking at it maybe he's back for the Toronto game, but I would probably peg the Carolina game as more likely for Kevin. And for Ryan, we just don't know yet. Ryan, I feel like it's going to be. He was close several times on the road trip, and then there was a bit of a setback. And again, it's lower body, so we don't know what exactly it is. When it's nagging like this, you start thinking groin or things along those lines. When it's something that nags, but he's been close enough at times. And again, this is just my speculation. When you continue to think Hayes ready to go and then he's not. But it's still something, obviously, that I think they're trying to. They want to be able to rely on Ellis as we get into when the schedule really starts to really pick up, when you start having a lot of games in play. And I think they just looked at it and said, if we can take our time a little bit with this, and again, you do have the benefit of a team being 6-2-2, that you don't feel quite as much pressure to push, Ryan Ellis back in than you might have it, say, the record if they were a sub 500. Yeah,
absolutely. Part of me, Anthony, maybe it's just because I'm a fatalist. I'm like, if he's got a groin or soft tissue in there, sports hernia, whatever, I mean, it seems inevitable. How's he going to make it to like the playoffs if this thing just keeps nagging? And you see so many guys. I think of Donovan McNabb way back in the day, when he throws the interception, then he has the surgery, after he blows the game versus Dallas. But I'm just like, it's you're betwixt and between. It's so frustrating as a fan. Obviously not as frustrating as it is for the team and him, but it's like, if this is going to end up in the OR, why not just get it done? But easy for us to say. I
think if they had the idea that that's what was needed, I think they probably would have already done it already. Whatever it is I think they're. And again, this is purely is again pure speculation on my part. No report, no inside information in this circumstance. That when it nags like this and it's keeping you out, but when you've got as much space as the Flyers have been fortunate enough to have here at the start of the season, I think whatever it is that they're trying to do, they're trying to maximize it, and then we'll see where things go from there. You want to see Ellis in. We've seen what I think he and Ivan have a lot of. They've worked really hard, I think, during preseason to get on that same page almost immediately. And you do want to obviously see him in the lineup sooner rather than later, but. Again, if you have the opportunity to make sure that he's right and ready to go, and then you can count on him for the rest of the season, then that's then you slow play this as much as possible.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Chef?
So Alain Vigneault, he spoke to it briefly, and I'll quote him in a second. But this team, last year we saw that they kind of were lost. They didn't know who they are. And I forget who asked him during the press conference, said this team has an identity and what is it? And he said, works smart with the puck, works smart without the puck, paraphrasing, and, they compete and they're hard to play against. Is it safe to say after 10 games that this team does have that identity or even has its own identity yet?
I think they're trying to get to that point. The biggest thing I think that they want to be known for at the moment, especially considering how disastrous defensively they were, is you want to be able to play strong from the inside out. Any championship contender has to be able to base the strength of their play from the inside out. But again, it's not just the goaltending, it's not just the blue line, it's also the defensive commitment of the forwards too. And I've seen much more defensive commitment from this roster this season than certainly I saw last year. And a good bit of that, I think, also goes to just, we've pointed to Cam Atkinson's, offense, his goal scoring. But I also point to the fact of how hard he comes back defensively. And that is something that can be infectious, I think, to the rest of the roster. He has a certain enthusiasm level and wants to play that full 200-foot game, cliche, call it whatever you want. But it does have an effect. And it changes the kind of the overall mindset of the players, both up front, that, you got to bite. Keys to winning a championship is the ability to bite back hard defensively. It's not just about the goal scoring. It's also the ability to, play strong, but also have those times where, where you want your goaltender to do as good a job as possible, but you also want to be able to not burn them out. And good defensive play coming from the forwards and the defense will go a long way towards that.
Yeah. Talking about the goaltending, I mean, if there is one improvement area compared to last year that just sticks out like a sore thumb, it is the goaltending. And like you said, goaltending is a product of many different things. But you see Martin Jones sporting a .950 save percentage, and overall the team is in the range of a .928, and both goalies are playing well. And I tell you, they're your best penalty killers, and it just changes the whole arc of the team when they know they can either take chances or they can make mistakes, and it's just the whole vibe around the team has to be improved just for that alone.
Yeah, it is. And we had a conversation last night with Sheng Peng from San Jose Hockey Now. And I asked him about, in our podcast with him last night, about, obviously a very, very, very small sample size so far for Martin Jones, but compared, to what I saw of him in San Jose versus what I'm seeing now, I see a goaltender who's playing much more under control. I think, part of it is also knowing that that he has a team in front of him where there is a defensive commitment. And that helps, I think, a lot. But again, I don't think he's overextending himself. He's keeping things simple. And again, certainly he has the prior relationship with Kim Delabod has so far, at least in the short term, looks like it's paying dividends. And the thing I'm looking at with Jones is, with the exception of, I think, that first goal, first goal that he gave up to Vancouver on the road trip, which again was kind of a freak occurrence anyway. That he isn't letting that get to him. I think if he does end up giving up a bad goal, that he looks like he just seems like fairly calm and maybe just at peace with the fact that, he does certainly want to get his starts during the season, but he knows he's in a different role here. The expectations of him are going to be different here in Philadelphia than they were in San Jose. So the biggest thing I look at with him is, but having him also play certain key important games early in the season, that Washington game, for example, your goaltenders then feel like, okay, the coach is showing me some initial trust here early in the season. So I need to deliver, but to play in a way that allows the team in front of me to feel confident. And this Martin Jones he has more of a look of the goaltender we saw that helped San Jose go to the final. But again, the role is different. It's years later, and the expectations obviously are much different now. So as long adapting to those expectations, and so far, 3 games in, we'll take it for what it is, but it's a good start, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cool as a cucumber the other night. That's for sure. Dan?
Yeah, I just want to chime in on Martin Jones, and you guys are welcome to respond. As someone who's had him on my fantasy hockey team for the last 4 years, the trademark of his play is streakiness. So he was pretty bad in the preseason, and he's looked really good in his last few games. But it's not necessarily different than what he's done in the past because he's been a very streaky goalie. So I think that there's certainly a chance that just being in a different situation and being with Dillabaugh is going to, turn it around. And so he can get back to the goalie that he was 3 and 4 years ago. But I think just to look at, both sides of the coin, he's a guy who's been very streaky. So there is a chance that we're getting the good Martin Jones and, that we'll get the bad Martin Jones coming up here at some point in the season. Of course, as a backup, we're not going to, be impacted as much by it as we would as he was kind of like the 1A in San Jose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if he goes from 950 to 915 and he's the backup goal and he's getting 30, 32 games, I mean, I'm still not complaining as long as he makes momentum saves. And, that's what they're looking for. It's a $2 million backup. I'm sure the Flyers were looking at other players, but
and Isaiah, I would say to you as well is that certainly when we were in the off season, we all had our questions about the signing of Jones and where he is. And I know for me, the goalie I was focusing on was Laurent Brossoit from who's now with Vegas, right. And I'm sort of still kind of keeping an eye on how Brossoit is doing as well out in Vegas. But so far, again, the returns, and again, as Dan alluded to, when it comes to Jones, again, he does have streakiness. It's just, again, you are not going to be, in theory, as long as there's not an injury to heart, you won't be utilizing him as much as obviously San Jose did. And that's, but again, we all know how things go during the season. But he does, I will also say that it helps that he has an experience, and I used the phrase with him when they signed him that we know he's an innings eater, like the classic pitching, where he's
right.
He can we know he can probably handle a load, but again, it's also a case of the more you see of him, the more the warts might show, and in that circumstance, that's something we have to keep an eye on.
Right. I mean, by the end of Brian Elliott's tenure, we didn't get enough quality, and he certainly couldn't handle the quantity. And we know at least with Martin Jones, he can handle the quantity. It's just, when's the expiration date gonna come up, Chef?
To piggyback what Dan said about streakiness, now I had JVR on my fantasy hockey for 2 out of the last 3 years, I guess. And he's very streaky as well. Now we saw him finally score a goal, but that line has been working their butts off, and they've been pretty good, but they haven't got any real goals to show for it. Do you think each one of them on that line, you think Oscar or JVR, you think if they get one at even strength, it's going to be like a floodgate opening up? I mean, I remember JVR definitely being very streaky. And I remember Oscar, when he goes on a tear, it's usually for 3 or 4 games too. And that's before, he had his cancer treatments.
And I would say, again, defense, one of the things I am happier about with James Van Riemsdyk has shown in maturity his play is his dedication, I think, to defensive play. He's playing on a different spot too, obviously on the right side versus the left side now. But I also think, and I'm going to be, again, this is where when we get to a healthy Kevin Hayes, how might that change? Lawton currently playing at the center position, I think doing a pretty good job in this circumstance. With obviously with Kevin being out for the first early part of the season, but Oscar feels like he's been on the doorstep for games at this point now, where he just comes close and just doesn't finish it. There's I think that very well could be right, Chef, that it could be a case where once they get one, then you might see 3 or 4 in a 4-game span between that group. But I do think they've made a focus on trying to be as solid defensively as possible. Not a full-on – nobody – you don't want to have a full-on checking line with the exception of maybe your fourth line at most. And even then you want to have some modicum of skill on that unit as well. So they're getting opportunities. It's just they have not been able to finish them. And Oscar especially. I mean, obviously, I think Scott's had a couple big goals. Certainly, he had a big one against, and they worked really hard, obviously, for that goal, that second goal against, against Arizona. And that was a lot of hustle that was involved on that. And I think Elaine has trust in that unit and feels like as long as I'm getting good, strong two-way play out of that group, I can, deal. The feeling is that goals will come for that unit eventually. In those circumstances.
Yeah, you think about it, they're ranked in the top 3 in the league in terms of possession, I believe.
Yes, yeah,
and
they're very good numbers. And when I was parsing through some of the other, I think Money Puck early on in the season had them. I think it was like 6 or 7 games in, like the 6 or 7 game mark. I think Money Puck had them up around third. They were like the 4th best line in the NHL in terms of like. Overall XG at 5-on-5. It was really impressive early on. And again, the belief here is that they have to kind of handle that.
Yeah, before the Brassard line started to slump a little bit, I thought maybe Oscar and Farabee maybe could switch places, and that would complement that group of players. Maybe a little more size on the Brassard line, and Farabee looking to shoot a little bit more with Lawton, but it's tough to argue with those kind of results, so. It
just clicked. I mean, that unit really did that Brassard, that unit clicked, and what helps is, again, Brassard has, he's been around the block. He certainly knows this division as well as anybody with the amount of teams that he's played for within the division itself between Columbus, the Islanders, and obviously the Rangers. But yeah, they probably maxed out. I mean, do I anticipate Derek is going to continue to have this kind of offensive performance throughout the season? No, probably not. But as long as that line continues to click, they're going to keep them together. And there's just that they played with the two of them in Columbus. They played together. They feed off each other. It was like, and they're obviously not going to mess around with it for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Before we let you go, Ant, I just wanted to hit you with one more and get your impressions about the Jack Eichel trade in terms of just the whole milieu, the whole backdrop, how it ended up versus maybe expectations and maybe the vantage point from both teams.
And again, Vegas, we know when we got into the summer, I mean, I kind of thought that Vegas was always in on Eichel and just the way their lineup was set up. And I know Vegas had been pretty successful with sort of a non-traditional strong centers down the middle situation. They were good enough. I mean, with Stevenson, with Carlson. But again, as we saw also when they got to I guess we can call it the conference final. It wasn't really. It was the Final Four, that a team that had a better center situation took advantage of it, and Montreal did that to them in the playoffs. So I think they had always been eyeing up Eichel. It's just they got to the offseason, couldn't make a trade, and then they made they made the acquisition of Dadonov, which had $5 million, which was kind of scratching my head. And to me, it was almost like, well, this seems like the in case we don't get Jack Eichel move.
Right.
And now they got Eichel, but they obviously cost them Alex Tuck. In exchange, and I like Tuck. I think he's from Syracuse, and he grew up a Sabres fan, and I think the Sabres are acquiring a player that I think will be all in trying to change the culture in Buffalo, and again, he being part of a winning organization, getting to a Stanley Cup final. We kind of sort of wrinkle our nose sometimes that well, he's got not championship experience, but he's been deep. That does count for a team like Buffalo when they're trying to make that transition. So I like the deal from that perspective. And again, the acquisition, and again, getting Peyton Krebs, who I think is a really excellent prospect, and I think Buffalo's being smart by playing him in Rochester and giving him, the ice time that he really needs in a feature role, especially when you have Dylan Cousins, who I feel, and Russ Cohen and I, my co-host on Off the Post, are both in the agreement that Cousins was probably been rushed a little bit. You can kind of hedge your bets, I think, now with Krebs, when you have both Cousins and Krebs potentially going forward, that Krebs might end up being that top line center potentially going forward, and that put a little less pressure on Dylan Cousins to have to be the top line guy. From Vegas's perspective, I mean, it's it's sort of like the Tampa Bay Lightning route in that we're going to see how this whole cap situation is going to work itself out. I know Dadonov has been underwhelming in Vegas. His point totals haven't been great. He hasn't really. I remember Jesse Granger from the Athletic stated that it's not even the scoring. It's just you want to see Dadonov be more engaged. And you need that right now, especially when you're going to be waiting at least 3 months a minimum of 3 months for Jack to be ready to play. And then what happens, salary cap wise. That being said, boy, oh boy, that is a tremendous center situation for them. And I know someone put a depth chart out and had Nolan Patrick ahead of and Stevenson in the fourth line. I'm like, no, Stevens has been far too good to be dropped down to a fourth line role just because he played that in Washington. No, he'll either have second or third line role between him and Carlson and then Patrick, and then Patrick probably will handle the fourth line. But Patrick in that fourth line role, we'll see. Again, I haven't seen much out of him yet.
He's hurt again.
Yeah, he's been hurt. Obviously, he got hurt again. But even in the first game or two that I did see him, it was kind of like, pretty much looks like Nolan Patrick in Philadelphia so far, and we'll see where that goes with him. Just a lot of talent, but again, I need to see more out of Nolan. But having Eichel there, they got tremendous depth on their blue line. But I do become concerned a little bit with Vegas's system depth. They've really kind of strip mined making these big moves. Yes, they look like an NHL level juggernaut. Once injuries hit, you got to deal with the cap ramifications. It's going to get a bit hairy for them. And again, they're already off to it. Their season start was slow on this road trip of late. They've looked better. The power play seemingly has woken up a bit. But yeah, they're going to need Mark Stone back soon for them to kind of climb back in the Pacific. Because again, when you got Calgary rolling the way they're rolling and Edmonton rolling the way they're rolling, Vegas has been used to ruling the roost over there, and they're in for a battle this season.
Yeah, really exciting when he comes back. I wish him all the luck. He's got this novel procedure with the disc replacement as opposed to a fusion. It's going to be worth watching.
It will be, and again, that's the big question. When he comes back, are you getting the Jack Eichel, bona fide number one center? Can he be a 90-point guy? Can he match? And again, being in the same, he's going to feel added pressure because he's now in the same division as the guy he's constantly compared to in Connor McDavid. So, and he acknowledged that during the press conference. So it's going to be, but I would tell you that, overall, if I'm looking at Vegas's roster versus Edmonton's roster, Edmonton's playing great hockey, but I don't think, man for man, Vegas's blue line is outstanding. And again, as long as Robin Leonard can hold down the fort in net, if they get Jack back and he's able to give you pretty good offensive production, he should be able to click fairly quickly with that lineup with the talent level that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, thank you so much for doing this. Where can people catch your work?
So several places. First up, obviously, Center Ice Philly Hockey Magazine. Right now, we're currently in a digital format right now with the rinks being sort of, we're working on getting print editions out soon. But right now, I am posting close to weekly reports on the Flyers called 5 Flyers Thoughts on CenterIcePhilly.wordpress. We also, you can find obviously my main podcast, which is Off the Post Radio, which is part of the Full Press NHL network. We also beyond that, other places as well. Some other things certainly for Full Press as well. Those are the main two. And again, you can read my stuff there for the most part at Center Ice.
Fantastic. Anthony, thanks again.
My pleasure, Isaiah. Take care.
All right, you too. Dan,
Here I am.
Here you are. Here you are to clean up whatever dangling participles are left from the analysis. And Chef is doing what he's taking care of what he's got to do. So what's on your mind with this team is after 10 games?
It's just a hard team to kind of figure out where they're going to end up when this season is over. You watch the games this week, and Arizona, halfway through this game, you're thinking to yourself, man, is this going to be Arizona's, first win of the year? Because the Flyers just didn't look like it. The game could go, 6 periods and no one would score. And then they finally broke through and they were getting the better of the scoring chances. But still, it's Arizona. You'd think you'd want to, come out a little stronger, put a dagger in them early. And then the Penguins game was just kind of, the Penguins are missing so many of their top players. And the Flyers just kind of looked blah. It looked like a Flyers game last year, except that our goalie was playing better than last year. And then the Caps game was a good game. That was a game I did not expect them to win that game, especially with Martin Jones playing. But Jones was very good. Finally, the second defense pair with Sanheim and Ristolainen had a pretty good game, both by the eye test and by the analytics. And that was a really good win. It's still just very hard for me to get a handle on this team. And I think a lot of it is because I'm worried about Ryan Ellis. Like, I don't know what's going on. I know that they've, talked about potentially a groin type of hip type of situation. I'm concerned about it. He's been out for a while now. He played in 3 games, and he's been out, in the 7 games since. And it's it's a little bit alarming, because if he's not there, I think things could get fairly dicey. Right now, Justin Braun is playing above the level that we would expect him to play. And so that's a lot of my hesitation comes in with this team. I'm also a little concerned because, again, that Lawton, JVR, Lindblom line has been terrific, but they have not been scoring. And so I'm a little bit concerned about a dip in play might be coming with that group. So I do have some concerns. I me, I like being optimistic about this team. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, where are you, where are you right now with your level of optimism and where you think this team's going to end up here?
Yeah, you brought up a lot of interesting points. It's just kind of going back and kind of squaring a circle. Against Arizona, they had the same kind of malaise they played with against Calgary on their last road game. And it took that disallowed goal. I think it was Atkinson that got the goal, and it was disallowed. And then they woke up. Then they started playing like the Flyers. And if it weren't for Hart, they'd probably lose the game. Certainly, had they played a better team, they would have lost that game. And then Pittsburgh was a disappointment. They were outcompeted. The quality of chances was clearly favoring Pittsburgh. And like you said, depends. We're a depleted lineup. I know the Flyers have some injuries, and we're all waiting for them, I guess, to have a full lineup so we can evaluate them, get them a full lineup for 10, 15 games. But the Washington game is kind of like the optimistic part of it, because for 2 periods there, they played the consummate road game. Their coverages were excellent. They weren't giving Washington a lot. When they needed a big save, they got it. And then they cratered a little bit in the 3rd period, and Jones, pulled them out of the fire. So I was happy with that game. But if you take it on balance, there are some inconsistencies. And at the end of the day, a team that blamed not having Matt Niskanen in the lineup last year and kind of getting a similar player in Ryan Ellis and not knowing where he's at some point, we're only 10 games in, but as we hit the 20-game mark, the 30-game mark, we got to know where we stand with that player, because everybody gets slotted so much better defensively and things make so much sense. I can see the expiration date on Nick Seeler running out, and we need to see that. And then you see the coaches make really kind of curious moves. Like, why is Yandel off the top power play. I know he makes a couple risky plays, but Provorov is so counterintuitive on the power play in general. So I'm definitely like the fact that they are sticking up for each other, and guys like McEwen, they make a difference. And Risto coming to the fore, playing his best game as a Flyer, and really making his presence felt, and not just being stout at the point of contact. Good outlet passes, contributes with the shot that I think Couturier, put back in the net, so he gets a point. So it's a mixed bag right now.
Yeah, it's and you touched on something else that kind of gives me a little bit of pause, which is the coaching, right? Like if I had total confidence in this coaching staff that they were going to make the right moves, I'd be a little more optimistic at the moment. But like you said, Michel Therrien made some changes to the power play that just don't make any sense. I mean, anyone with two eyes can see that Keith Yandle is better on the power play than Ivan Provorov. I mean, Ivan Provorov has been fantastic at even strength this season.
Yes.
He's been terrific. He's, again, their best defenseman. He will continue to be the best defenseman on this team for a long period of time, many years into the future. But he's not an elite power play defenseman. And so putting him back up on the top unit and then moving Giroux over to the right, which just makes the power play awkward. When Giroux is on the left, he's got the option for the one-timer. He's got the option for the pass through the crease. From the right, it's just an awkward look. I don't really understand it. And it's things like that give me less confidence in the coaching staff and make me less optimistic about the team.
Yeah, it's hard to argue. I think one of the things that we picked up from the offseason into this season that AV's trying to address is being more patient, being more positive. That's probably why he hadn't broken up the combination line combos, like the switch that I had recommended, Farabee and Lindblom changing places, probably would have taken place had the players in their exit interviews not, barked up about, listen, we need X, Y, Z from the coaching staff as well. I mean, we're all in this together. And I get it, but it's moves like that on the power play that just really, just leave you I don't know. I just wonder what the hell is going on. The Flyers are 21.4% for 14th on the power play. Let's move that up a little bit. Certainly when Ellis gets in that rotation, Provorov has so many tough minutes as it is. Why not just play him on the PK and 5-on-5? But we'll have to wait to see what happens when Ellis gets back.
It makes too much sense, It's exactly it. Like this guy at some point, the miles are going to add up. Like there's no reason to also have him on the top power play unit.
And AV's a guy who says he doesn't like players playing on both units. He likes to separate them as much as possible. So, what gives? And then the PK is doing well, even though they're middle of the pack at 15th, 82.9. As long as they're 80 and above, and especially if they're clutch, like a goaltender making key saves, they get those key PK success. Get that success when they need it. It's certainly so much better than last year. Of course, the goalies have a lot to do with it, but when they're not being passive, when they're really pressuring, especially with the way Atkinson adding that threat, that the other team has to worry that if they get him breaking, he's a real threat to score. What a great play, by the way, by Ovi catching up to Atkinson. As disappointing as it was to see him get denied a chance, that was a hell of a play.
Ovechkin is just, it's what a treasure. And I live in DC, but what a treasure that team has had. And hey, when we had the worst record in the league, we got JVR. So, there's not much of a difference between those two players, right?
Well, we just missed out on a Hall of Famer. It's no problem. It's the league had to, do a good job for Chicago. It's been 1960 since they won the Cup. And then 1980s, what was the Mike Keenan era? That they were really anything before. Yeah, really.
And then the Penguins, the Penguins are the bad one year and they end up with Malkin and Crosby. So
it's amazing how that works.
And then the Devils get back-to-back number one picks, or the Rangers. And then when we get the number 2 pick, we've got Ron Hextall selecting who takes Eeyore, Sir Mopes a lot, Nolan Patrick, over Heiskanen and Makar.
Overruling his scouting staff, from what I understand. So we can look at that. We have some bitterness saved up for you. Don't worry. Well, Negadelphia lives. So
Negadel, absolutely.
Absolutely. So look, you look ahead to the schedule. We're gonna get a couple other things before we wrap, but I mean, this is really gonna tell the tale for the Flyers. They have Toronto Wednesday, then back-to-back Friday and Saturday on the road versus Carolina and Dallas. Then they welcome, after a couple-day break, the 16th Tuesday at home versus Calgary. Get some revenge there. At home versus Tampa Bay. They're starting to find their sea legs. The perfection line comes in on the 20th. That's a Saturday. And then they go back on the road. They do that Tampa Bay, Florida combo back-to-back, which the Flyers always struggle on the 23rd, 24th. Then they're at home versus Carolina. They're only undefeated last time I looked. I don't think they've lost yet. Then they get the Devils at New Jersey on a Sunday. They usually lose those games. And then they play the Islanders. They're old thorn in the side, the Islanders, on the 30th. And by the time what's that? 14 games in 21 days or something like that? By the time they are done that gauntlet, that is November, we're going to know what we have in this team.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the revenge against the Flames. The big Calgary Flames revenge game. You don't get to say that very often.
No, I mean, they just embarrass the Flyers. They smother them. Of course, the Flyers didn't have any legs, but...
Yeah, I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but let's see when Ellis comes back. And, when Hayes comes back, let's see how effective he is. It's going to be, I think it's, I still think this team might go through a little bit of a rough patch here at some point.
Yeah.
Hopefully the goaltending continues to play like it is, and hopefully Martin Jones continues to play like he is, because, with the number of back-to-backs that they have and the number of 2 games in 3 nights, or 3 games in 4 nights, we're going to be seeing a decent amount of Martin Jones. So let's hope that he can keep this level of play up, or at least, if not this level, but just a level of somewhat consistent play, because the bad Martin Jones, we're probably not going to win those games. So, yeah, it's a tough stretch, but this league, there's not many teams that are easy to play against. You've got Arizona, you've got San Jose, Ottawa. There's not a lot of teams on the schedule that you'd look at and you'd say, oh, there's a W.
And even Ottawa, they've had trouble with. By the way, it's 11 in 21 days, but still, yeah, even Ottawa, they've struggled with. So, it's funny, anytime you play a Kachuk, the Flyers struggle. I love that player, though. Boy, I'd love to have him or his brother, for that matter.
I'd take his dad at this point.
Oh, well, sure, yeah. But listen, the Flyers got depth up front. I mean, it would really be interesting if Hayes can just kind of get established. And see, and Allison, we're not even talking about Allison. Allison's probably like 2 months away, I would think, at least.
We've got some X factors. We've also got some X factors down with the Phantoms. I mean, I know that they're not playing all that well right now as a team, but you've still got Cam York potentially. You've got Morgan Frost. I mean, so there's some X factors there that could help at some point this season. So
yeah, Frost is playing a little better. I saw him in some of the action. He's got a little bit more confidence in his stride, playing a little bit more of a 200-foot game, and so. We'll see. Yeah, and you're right about that. I mean, it's not all going to be from the outside or from within. Just a reminder, everybody, that the Alumni Game is coming November 15th. It's great names there: Lindros, Sinclair, Howe, Gagne, Briere, Knuble, Hartnell, Leach, Reggie Leach. Wow. And I mentioned last time, Pelle Eklund's going to be playing, Murray Craven, I think it's Ron Sutter, or I forget which.
There's so many of them.
Yeah, Upshaw, Bundy's going to be playing, Bobby Esch, Dan McGillis, Fridge, so he's going to be playing. We're not going to be punching anybody this time. But, yeah, so it's going to be a fun time. So just before we go, I got to get your comments about that McDavid goal. Was one that we're going to remember. And I think you made a really apt comparison to Pavel Bure. And for people who have never seen Pavel Bure and his mind-blowing moves, his speed. I mean, he was such a phenomenon when he was at his peak. And even a better all-around player is Connor McDavid, and it was very reminiscent of the Russian Rocket.
I mean, we may be seeing, the peak performance from the best player that I've ever seen from a talent perspective. I mean, before McDavid, I would say that Mario Lemieux for me was the greatest player in terms of a guy that goes out there and is just like basically completely unstoppable, right?
Agreed.
I mean, Wayne Gretzky
Agreed.
is the most prolific player of all time, and probably the most purely skilled and hockey IQ level of all time. But from a purely physical, talented standpoint of I'm going to go out there and you can't stop me. For me, it was Lemieux, because he'd go out there and you couldn't get the puck away from him. I mean, the moves he would make would be unbelievable. He'd go out there and he'd put up 5 or 6 points just, very easily. And McDavid, the first time I saw him in the World Juniors, I'd said to myself, this is a bigger, faster, stronger version of Sidney Crosby. That's to me what Connor McDavid is. He is just freakish. And he scores all these goals where he just makes it look so easy. And the goal he scored the other night, he takes the puck out of the zone, and you could tell that he immediately wanted to get back into the zone. But one of the players on the Oilers was still stuck in the zone. So he kind of had to circle around in the neutral zone. And then he times it so that he comes into the zone right when his teammate comes out of the zone. And then there's basically a box of 4 players in front of him that he's got to go around. It was against the Rangers, right?
Yeah. It had the 2/3 pairing defenseman out there. He probably noticed that too.
Yeah, it was a box of 4 Rangers players, and he basically went right through all of them and then scored an unbelievable goal. And it reminded me of Pavel Bure, because Pavel Bure wasn't as good of a hockey player as McDavid. Obviously, maybe no one is. But Bure would do the same thing, where he would kind of patiently wait in the neutral zone, or he'd even do it in the offensive zone sometimes, where he would kind of peel off, and then he would circle, and then with his speed and stick handling, he would attack and just go through multiple players and then score an unbelievable goal. And so, if anyone hasn't seen Pavel Bure, go watch some highlights of him. He just scored some unbelievable goals, the Russian Rocket. But that McDavid goal, and there's so many of his goals that are unbelievable in many different ways. It's just so much fun watching that guy play hockey.
It's, what it's like? It's like taking like 70s hockey and putting it on like 4 times fast forward. It's the ability to play at that pace with such precision is really amazing. I think McDavid is the finest pure offensive talent I've ever seen, even exceeding Mario. Now, Mario had some other advantages in terms of size, and he used them, but he couldn't play with this kind of pace. And Mario was deceptively fast. But, well, I tell you, Connor McDavid is really something. It's almost like it would be criminal. The guy ended up like Ernie Banks and never winning a championship. But we'll have to see how that plays out. He's got to get a goalie. I tell you, Edmonton, they got to do something to goal, because they're not going to do anything with that kind of goaltending. Koskinen is awful, and Mike Smith is ancient. So, I don't know what a lot of the things they were doing. I was pulling up the 2021 NHL Draft. Did they have I guess they were probably drafting after those 2 goalies went, because they were, But do they even have any? I was thinking, do they even have any good goalie prospects? I'm not sure that they do. I don't know. Didn't they take? Wait a minute. I actually have my hockey notes with me. It's the prospects issue. So I'm going to cheat and leaf through the pages while you're talking, and hopefully their writer will do a better job than the writer.
Yeah, so they didn't have a chance in 2021. This year, right. No, they drafted 22nd this year, so it was a couple spots after the goalies went. But you'd think they would want to make that a priority. But then again, we're talking about the team that signed Koskinen to a long-term deal, and he's just that was
Chiapet's parting gift. So, I'm talking about Peter Chiarelli. It's what they ended up calling him, Chip It. Yeah, they have someone that the Hockey News rates as a B-list prospect in Ilya Konovalov or something like that. If I'm butchering the name, please forgive me, Ilya. And then another one who's a sleeper, Stuart Skinner. So it doesn't sound like they have somebody imminent in the system.
Oh yeah, I've got Stuart Skinner on my fantasy squad. I'm hoping maybe he'll get a shot. But yeah, they don't have any elite level goalie prospects, and their minor league system as a whole is not all that great. Evan Bouchard is a guy that he looks like he's going to be a pretty good offensive defenseman, but I don't know if he's good enough defensively to be out there as much as some of the better defensemen in the league are. And then they took Philip Broberg. I don't know, it was 2019. They took him number 8 overall in 2019, and there were just a number of players that I thought kind of made more sense at the spot. But yeah, I don't know. I think that eventually they'll figure it out, and you just with Draisaitl and McDavid, I just think you're gonna win a championship at some point. But to this point, they haven't even gotten close. I mean, you just get embarrassed in the playoffs for the most part.
They made the semifinals one year, right?
Was that the bubble year?
Or was it the one before that? The year was it 19? I forget. It's all a blur because of these seasons, the way they were, cut back and everything, truncated.
Oh yeah, no, 2017 they lost in the conference semifinals, so they won one round. But going back, this is amazing to me. I mean, last year they lost in the first round. They missed the playoffs the 3 years before that with McDavid and Draisaitl. Then the year before that they lost in the conference semis, and they missed the playoffs the 10 years prior to that. It's crazy.
Yep. Yeah. It's a thrill to watch those guys play, but after a while,
it really is.
It really gets frustrating to not have a championship or at least not make a final. I mean, with that kind of frontline talent. But, there's another team coming in this Wednesday, Toronto, that has a lot of talent. Not quite that front line, although I would say Matthews is right there with Draisaitl. So, and the other guy,
yeah, very different players, but
very comparable. So they're kind of getting it together, and there'll be a very good contest this Wednesday. And before we go, just to remind everybody that Jim South Street, 400 South Street, 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, fries, hoagies you could ever want in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. And don't worry, if you live down there at 400 South Street and you can't make it over, just use DoorDash, and they'll get that delicious food right to your door. So the next time you need that cheesesteak, with or without, doesn't matter. Just go to Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And with that, Dan, we're going to wrap it up. Let's get your information with how people can get in touch with you and follow you on Twitter and elsewhere.
Yeah, so folks can follow me on Twitter at dsilver88. And, throw me a follow. And certainly welcome to DM me and get into some arguments or ask some questions or, whatever you'd like. I'm a horse racing guy, too. So if you have horse racing questions, you can throw them out there, too.
Absolutely. That's a whole other field of really interesting study. And just a reminder, Chef to the Left B, at Chef to the Left B for Chef B, and that's the number 2. At Chef to the Left B on Twitter. Check him out. He had to bail tonight. He had an obligation. We appreciate his contribution tonight. And as for myself, you can follow me, Isaiah, at ISAIAH_520. Isaiah, don't forget the _520. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. We're on 12 or 13 different podcast platforms, including Apple, SoundCloud, Spotify, iHeart, YouTube. Make sure you hit that notification bell so the next time we have a show, and subscribe, of course. And if you could give us a rating, it's really appreciated on, especially on Apple Podcasts. It moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast. So check us out. We also have a Facebook page as well. And with that, until next time, everybody, take care.